Great. Well, I hope you can all hear me. And just want to say good morning to everybody. Welcome to the Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce quarterly business breakfast review for Q3. And this is obviously held in conjunction with our great partners, Birmingham City University. And we, as always, thank them for their ongoing support of the QBR and the Chamber in general. I mean, there is so much going on in the world right now. In fact, the panel we were just reflecting beforehand that seems to be the norm right now. But I think this week is exceptional even by regular standards. So there's lots to talk about, lots to discuss. We obviously had the Prime Minister's announcements on the nationwide COVID restrictions earlier in the week, and we're now waiting with bated breath for the Chancellor's update and statement on his winter economy plan later today. A little plug, the Chamber team will be all over that, and certainly once we've got the details, we'll be communicating that out. So please do keep your eyes and ears peeled to our social media channels, and we'll make sure that we're informing everybody of what we're hoping to be some significant new measures to provide much needed support for business. So the format for this morning's event is pretty standard for those who are regular attendees. What I'm going to shortly do is hand over to my colleague Raj Kandola from the Chamber, who's going to talk us through the results of the most recent survey for Q3 that we've conducted on business sentiment here in Greater Birmingham. Thank you to everybody who took the time to fill out that survey, and I think really keen to see how we hopefully are responding and rebounding from the results of Q2, which were on every measure the worst set of results that we'd seen since we started doing this survey over 20 years ago. So we've seen the cliff edge, and what we now want to start to see is the uptick and the recovery. And is it going to be V-shaped, U-shaped, Nike swoosh-shaped? Well, we'll start to get a sense when Raj walks us through that shortly. We're then going to hear from our first guest speaker, Dr. Justin Varney, who's the Director of Public Health here in Birmingham. Justin's been with us for the last two QBRs and been able to sort of provide brilliant updates on the local COVID situation, his take on what's happening nationally, and sort of view on what's going to be happening in the next short while. Always incredibly informative. And really looking forward to hearing from Justin. And we're going to hear from Justin, then have the opportunity for Q&A with him. He has to leave by about 9:45, so that's going to be the first part of the session. And then we're going to hear from our second panelist, Simon Struthers, who's director at 3P Innovation. And we've got a theme this morning of innovation, and Simon's going to give us a perspective on how businesses can innovate their way through this crisis and to future success. And we'll then wrap up the event with the Q&A with Simon and Raj, and I promise to have this done and everyone away for the rest of the day by 9:15. Now, just to kick off and sticking with the theme of innovation, I just want to hand over to Joe Birch, who's the Director of Innovation, Enterprise, Employability and Business Engagement at BCU, who, as I say, have been our long-term collaborators on this very important quarterly business review. So, Joe, over to you to give the welcome.
Thank you, Paul. And that's quite a title, isn't it? I never realised how long it was. Welcome to you all. I'm really sad not to be welcoming you from Curzon Building. My home just doesn't have a great view. Today's theme is about innovation, and it's a subject which those of you who know me well know I'm very passionate about. I believe innovation is the key to addressing fundamental challenges that we face, and we must think carefully about how we engage across boundaries to ensure the seeds of growth, recognising we need both science, engineering, digital and creativity to nurture success. It's more than 5 years ago since we sat down and reviewed the regional innovation ecosystem here at BCU, and it drove us to create a project called STEAM House, a collaborative centre for innovation to bring together STEM with the arts in a supportive space to create, amplify, experiment and develop knowledge to create new products and services from idea to reality, where entrepreneurs, students, small businesses and innovators could collaborate and develop ideas. When we conceived STEAM House 5 years ago, the region was performing below its potential in respect of innovation, with less infrastructure than more successful regions. And since then, much has progressed, but I don't think we foresaw the current challenge ahead. I'm pleased to say, in spite of COVID, Steam House is now a year away from completion, and those of you in Birmingham will see the building nearly ready for its roof. The building has an amazing heritage of our industrial past mixed with a modern facade, which will house some of the latest artificial intelligence and 5G technology, working alongside a fully housed production space. It's this merger of old and new, engineering and creativity, which we believe will create a powerful piece of infrastructure from which to innovate. It's part of a wider knowledge quarter with growing investment from Aston University, Bruntwood, High Speed 2, and hopefully a new creative consortium bringing a nationally significant film studio to our region. Interestingly, in spite of this phenomenal investment that BCU are putting into this quarter, it's not the buildings which inspire me. The power of individuals to collaborate, spar, and develop new concepts will be a critical component of success. Whilst we're locked down with the daily smattering of new rules and some rather disturbing economic realities, suggesting the outlook for output over the next 12 months is pessimistic, we must not lose sight of our ability to innovate through collaboration, opening up our home offices for conversation which will lead to new ideas. Evidence from previous crisis points to the postponement of startups during a crisis. The first signals in the current crisis are pointing in the same direction, and it's imperative that we work together to fuel new ventures, find out new ways of producing goods or delivering services. Our young people depend on this. Nationally, 1 in 7 of all 18 to 24-year-olds, that's 14%, are on the claimant count, and this is a rise of more than 125% on pre-crisis levels. Never has it been more important to work with partners, and we continue to celebrate and value the role that the Chamber are playing in helping us understand the impact of our current environment, but more importantly, enabling us to meet together to review, think, and take action to forge new ideas, great partnerships, and build opportunities. I really hope you enjoy this morning. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Jo, and thanks for that. No, what is a really great partnership with between the Chamber and BCU. So right, let's get stuck into the meat of the survey and the results. And to talk us through this, I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague from the Chamber, Raj Kandola. So Raj, over to you.
Thanks, Paul. Good morning, everyone. Firstly, can you all hear me? Brilliant, excellent, okay, fantastic. So on we go then. So before we get into the meat of the results, I'll quickly just run through some background around the quarterly business report and what it entails. Essentially, the quarterly business report is set by the British Chambers of Commerce. It's been around for 31 years. We've had the digital data set for 23. Now, our survey covers 6 geographical areas, as you can see. That's Birmingham, Burton Chase, Lichfield, Tamworth, Solihull, and Sutton. And this quarter's survey took place not long ago, so between the 24th of August and the 14th of September. So as we know, a number of areas across the country are facing tighter restrictions around coronavirus. And this quarter we received 438 responses, which is one of the highest figures we've had in almost 5 years. And what we do is we go out to businesses and ask a set of questions around domestic demand, export demand, recruitment intentions, but also any concerns they might be facing. And we use a balanced score approach. So put simply, we'll take the percentage of firms that reported growth in an area and times that by 1. We take the percentage of firms that reported constancy in an area and times that by 0.5. And we take the percentage of firms that reported a decrease in an area and times that by 0. And we add those 3 figures together, and that gives us an overall score. And if that score's over 50, then we're in growth territory. If it's under 50, then we're in negative territory. So I'll start with domestic sales then. So domestic sales refers to UK business that's taken place over the previous 3 months. Looking at the graph on the left-hand side, you can see the QBR index combined. Sharp rebound there from the all-time low we saw in Q2. So the index went up by 22 points to a figure of 43. Interesting contrast in the individual sectors. So as you can see, big increase in the manufacturing balance score. That went up by 40 points compared to Q2 to a figure of 56. Whereas the service index, that went up by 20 points, so not to the same extent compared to the figure of Q2, to a figure of 41. And in both instances, it's because we saw a drop in the number of firms reporting a decrease in their domestic sales compared to last quarter. And moving on to export sales, and so export sales refers to international business that's taken place over the previous 3 months. And you can see, looking at the line, an upturn there. So looking at the QBR index, you can see a slight upturn. That was a 15-point upturn to 41. So with both export sales and the domestic sales, as you can see, looking at that particular line, still nowhere near the output we saw prior to the advent of coronavirus, and still both indicators are anchored in negative territory. There's still a long way to go until we get back to where we were prior to the crisis. And again, an interesting comparison between the two sectors. So the manufacturing balance score went up by 29 points, so compared to Q2, so a figure of 48, whereas the service index score went up by 7 points to a figure of 36. And again, that's because in both instances we saw a drop in the number of firms reporting a decrease in their export sales this quarter. Moving on to labour market and recruitment trends. So we saw a balance score of 44 for the workforce balance, which was a 3-point increase compared to Q2. But as for those of you on the webinar last time, that figure probably would have been a lot lower had it not been for the success of the job retention scheme in maintaining job numbers. 32% of businesses attempted to recruit, which was a 10% increase compared to Q2. Which was actually quite interesting because that figure is obviously up from the last quarter as we expected, but of those, 26% faced recruitment difficulties, which is actually a decrease of 17% compared to 2 quarters ago when we were, prior to the advent of coronavirus. So again, it maybe adds credence to the theory that with the greater number of redundancies that we're facing, businesses have a greater talent pool to choose from. 41% are operating at full capacity, which is an increase of 13% compared to Q2, but short of the figure we saw recorded in Q1. And then moving on to cash flow and price pressures then. So the red line you can see at the top, that's the QBR index combined for price pressures. And that's the one indicator you want to be as low as possible, because the higher that number is, the greater the number of firms are facing pressure to raise their prices. So whilst we saw a big drop in that index last quarter, it started to creep up again. So it went up by 4 points to 57, which is concerning to see. The cash flow index followed a similar trajectory, the line beneath it, the green line. That went up by 13 points to 37, but still way short of the 50 mark. And that's one indicator, I believe, that's actually entered negative territory 14 times over the last 13 years. So again, it just shows you the long-term cash flow issues that firms have been facing in the region prior to the advent of this crisis. In terms of price pressures, 24% cited the cost of raw materials as a key factor behind the pressure they're facing to raise prices, which is actually up from the 20% listed in Q2, which again could be related to the fact that anytime the government mention or release any policy related to tighter restrictions around COVID-19, the financial markets don't tend to like it. That leads to a drop in the value of the pound, and as we know, that makes it more costly to import raw materials. Interesting to see as well, 21% cited finance costs, which was a 3-point decrease compared to Q2. So put simply, less firms are facing cost pressures, but more are starting to put up their prices. And then moving on to business confidence and primary concerns, business concerns. The chart you can see on the left-hand side, looking at the red bars, that's the QBR index combined for turnover. And as you can see, looking at the red bar for Q3, that went up by 12 points to a figure of 51, so back in positive territory, which is good to see. The profitability index also went up, the grey bars next to them, by 11 points, back to a figure of 49, so just shy of positive territory. But as you can see, looking at the bars prior to Q2 2020, still some way short of the output we saw and the sentiment we saw before this crisis. We also ask a free text question, which is, what is your primary business concern? And 14% cited competition. But in terms of factors which were deemed more of a concern than 3 months ago, 20% cited taxation, which was 4% higher than the figure in Q2. and 33% cited inflation, which is the highest figure we've got on record. And you will have seen in July that the rate of inflation dropped from 1% to 0.2%, which is a 5-year low. But much of this was driven by the introduction of the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, which drove prices down. So obviously, as Paul mentioned, the theme of today's event is focusing on innovation in Greater Birmingham, and a key part around innovation. When we think of innovation, tends to involve businesses investing in technology, thinking about investment in CapEx. So what we've done here, the great thing about having a survey that's run for 31 years is that we can compare historical trends. And what we've got here, you'll see it's a comparison between UK GDP quarter-on-quarter growth and comparing that to the QBR index for capital expenditure running from 2007 to 2020. So looking at the red line at the top, that's the QBR index combined for investment in CapEx. That's pegged to the left axis. As we've always said, anytime that red line goes beneath the 50 mark, then we're in negative territory. The grey line beneath it, that's UK GDP quarter-on-quarter growth. That's pegged to the right axis. Again, anytime that line goes under 0, then the economy is contracting. There's a few things I think to point out. I think firstly, you can see there's quite a healthy correlation between the two data sets. Interesting to see as well that GDP growth fell to a figure of -2.1 in the midst of the financial crisis. So if you look back to the middle of 2008, well, this quarter, Q2, it's estimated to have fallen to -20.4, which again just shows the severity of this crisis. Also interesting to see as well, the fall in CapEx investment was actually more severe in this crisis compared to the financial crisis. So last quarter, as you can see at that with the red line, it fell to 28. It's picked up again by 8 points to 36. But looking at the financial crisis, if you go back to Q2 2009, that figure fell to 45. So obviously a lot more severe in this current crisis. But what's actually interesting is if you look at that red line, you can see at the start of the graph back in 2007, I mean, that figure was hitting quite high numbers, around 65 to 70 quite consistently. Since the financial crisis, we've come nowhere near that. You know, that line's been hovering around the 60 mark ever since. And the concern that we have is that this trend will be replicated. And the big worry we have is that investment levels won't hit the marks that we saw prior to the advent of coronavirus, which is again would be a long-term concern that we have. So to summarize then, we did see a notable increase in domestic demand and export demand, but still some way short of pre-COVID levels. The manufacturing sector fared much better, in some instances coming close to the output we saw in Q1, whereas the service sector saw a slower recovery. But again, no surprise really, given this fact that 75% of the economy is based on the services sector, so it's likely to be a slower recovery. Cash flow issues persist, and more firms are under pressure to raise prices. Hiring levels were slightly up, but again, concerns are still gathering around the end of the job retention scheme. And you might have seen last week that the ONS released data that the West Midlands had seen the second largest reduction in workforce jobs of any region across the UK. So I think 74,000 it was down. So again, it just shows you the long-term impact that COVID-19 could have on the labour market if not managed properly. As we've just said, investment levels do remain worryingly subdued, and that's why we've been lobbying with the British Chambers of Commerce to see if the government can ease some of these cash pressures and price pressures that firms are facing right now, so that would actually free up some cash and allow them to invest in their people and products and actually help grow their way out of this crisis. And of course, issues around taxation and inflation have become more prominent as well. So as you know, many of you will be familiar with our Keep Business Moving campaign. It's what we've been running since the start of March to help businesses connect, support and grow during this very difficult period. One way we're doing that is that we have our COVID-19 hub, which includes lots of information on government support initiatives for businesses and charities. So as you can see up there on the table, we've got lots of information on the various support programs. So covering the likes of the job retention scheme, we've updated it to cover the Kickstart scheme. You'll find information on there on the local lockdown grant funding, for example. And it's just set out where there's lots of information in terms of what the scheme entails, how you can access it, and when it's available from. So if you have any questions, do visit the COVID-19 hub on our website. And with that, I'll now hand back to Paul. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj. Yeah, and we'll certainly be updating that again today when we hear more from the Chancellor. The eagle eye may have spotted, I think that was version 40, the latest one. So we're going to be moving on to version 41 at least. Hopefully, can everyone hear me still? Yeah. Someone just give me a nod that you can hear me. Great. And what I was going to say, I mean, I suppose the results of the survey, the key is this is real live data from what businesses here across our region are telling us, and it very much backs up that general sense of, yes, there has been a recovery in recent months, certainly from the depths of April and May, but still lots of challenges out there. Recovery not as strong as maybe we would have hoped, certainly not back to pre-COVID levels. And then obviously right now we're being buffeted by new restrictions, new challenges, new concerns, and that's why the Chancellor's update today is so important, but also very much with Brexit now looming it's not even on the horizon, is it? It's 100 days to go. Very, very real, and certainly a concern with the sort of huge amount of questions that still exist over that. But so thank you, Raj, for the summary. What I'm now going to do is hand over to our first panelist, Justin Varney, the Director of Public Health here in Birmingham. If Justin's going to give us an update, if you want to pop questions into the chat, then what I'll do is pick those up and we'll look to answer as many of those as we can in the time frame allowed. So Justin, I'm going to hand to you.
Great, thank you, Paul, and hello everyone. So I'm going to focus today a little bit on kind of where we are now and where we're going, rather than rehash what I've said before. So what we have seen is an increasing number of cases in Birmingham pretty much since the middle of August. We went up, came down a bit, and then shot up again. Then we came down, got stuck, and we're just starting to see signs that we're going up again over the last 48 hours or so. And we're seeing now over the last couple of days and weeks actually that this is affecting all age groups. Particularly the highest case rate is in the 30 to 39-year-old age group. But when we look at across all the age groups, the band between 20 and 40 is the largest number of cases, and as a rate has the highest number of new cases. What we're seeing also is some differences between different ethnic groups. So we have more cases in our Asian community, but when we look at the uptake of testing, testing is highest in our Black, African and Caribbean community, followed by our Asian community, and lowest in our white community. So there's a whole series of things playing out at the moment in terms of the picture, but I would say it is very serious and getting more serious. We've also seen an increase in hospitalizations, and we've certainly gone over the last month from having single figure to double figures in terms of daily new admissions. So we are in a position where this is of concern, and it is really important that we all pay attention to the restrictions that have been put in place. Now, Birmingham is an area of national intervention. As part of the response, in addition to what we were doing when we became enhanced support around improving access and improving engagement with testing, we now have local restrictions across Birmingham, Sandwell, Solihull and now Wolverhampton, which prohibit you from visiting another person's private house or private garden, or them coming into your private house or private garden. We made a joint statement on hospitality last Monday ahead of the national change in regulations to ask venues to move to table service only, and that has now been adopted nationally. And the reason we're having these restrictions is when we look at the pattern of spread, where people are catching coronavirus from each other, there are two things happening. First, that if you are behind closed doors, you are much more likely in your own home to not keep that 2 meters of distance when you have visitors, friends or family over, and to forget and go in for that handshake or that hug. And that's what's spreading the virus behind closed doors. And we've seen a lot of clusters of cases where that's the connection. People have had a children's birthday party, they've had friends or family round for afternoon tea, and they just haven't been able to keep that distance from each other. The second thing that we've seen is in hospitality, two things going on. One, where people are drinking and getting disinhibited with alcohol, they are forgetting to keep the social distance. particularly when they're standing up. So it's crowding around bars, it's the smoking areas, it's the queues where we've seen transmission occur. And that's a very strong pattern that's come out of the Northwest, actually in Northwest outbreaks, that standing interaction is much more risky than when people are sitting down at a table and having table service. The other thing that we're seeing in hospitality is where people are trying to do the right thing, but they're holding celebrations. The people are getting up and moving between tables. So you've got a beautifully set out group of 30 people on 6 tables, 6 people on each table. And the moment your back's turned, someone goes up and shakes hands with everyone else in the room. And we've had at least one major group of cases in which that's exactly what's happened. The restaurant's done everything that it should. The guests, however, haven't. And then you've got 25 people out of a 30 people at an event, 25 of them all test positive. So it's really important that we get better understanding and better engagement with these restrictions, and that as businesses, you play your important part in reinforcing them and encouraging people to do what they should be doing. And I know that's very awkward, particularly in hospitality, to kind of remind people to sit down, but many areas actually you have more experience of this already to draw on for your staff to make that intervention. In terms of where we're heading next, we are continuing to increase testing capacity in the city. Birmingham is one of the areas that is prioritised for testing access. The most recent data that came through this morning to me, we've just topped over 2,000 tests per 100,000 population in the last 7 days. Now, a month ago, we were tracking at 800 tests per 100,000. So we've more than doubled. But what we are starting to see is the first signs that the percentage of those tests that is positive is picking up and increasing. And that's the bit that makes me concerned. 2 days ago, it was staying very flat. It's now starting to rise, which makes me more anxious than I have been earlier in the week. But getting more testing in the city has been a priority. We now have 6 testing sites live for walkthrough, 2 for drive-through, and we have further walkthrough sites coming on board over the next 10 days or so. We're running the drop and collect pilot. This is about doing additional surveillance and testing in very small areas of the city where we've got a spike in cases and not enough people are testing. And that's to help us basically fill in the blanks, that if we see these spikes and people aren't testing, we haven't got a good grip of the spread in the community. So by going in and offering doorstep testing kits to people in these small areas, we can close the gap. And actually what we are doing is we're finding positive cases where we're using this methodology, and that is helping to get a better understanding and getting better containment of the spread. I think it is likely that we will see further restrictions over the coming months as we go on. I think we are in a position now where across the country, almost every region of the country is tracking upwards in terms of the community spread. That's why you've seen the government raise us to the alert level of level 4. Level 5 is the level we went into lockdown in terms of full lockdown. So we're definitely on that precipice at the moment. And the government is looking at a whole range of options, and we are continuing to work with government closely about what the next steps are and where we might go. And I expect there will be further announcements next week in terms of hierarchies of escalation and where we may or may not go next. So we'll have to wait and see. In terms of the vaccine, as I've said before, I think it's highly unlikely we'll have vaccine rolled out in this calendar year. So as the Prime Minister said earlier this week, it's important that all of us kind of recalibrate and think we're in this now, certainly for the rest of 2020, and that this is the new normal, or rather this is now normal, and rather than thinking it's all going to be over in the next few weeks, because I'm afraid it's not. So I think I'll leave it there and go to questions, Paul, because I know there are always a lot that come through. Yeah. And I covered quite a lot in previous sessions.
No, thank you, Justin. And we will dive into the questions. I was going to sort of just say as well, I think that the Chamber's been working really closely with the council, and it's fair to say there's been a really impressive amount of local collaboration and collaborative working between various different parties, and so the sort of the comms has been able to flow well. And I know that also, and then you mentioned the interaction with government, and I think that while it maybe isn't perfect, it's certainly, there is a system in place, and there's daily briefings and an awful lot of conversations going on, which is all designed to make sure that the spread of information and what's going to happen is done in as much of a controlled way as possible, isn't it? And I think that that's probably welcomed by all. Just a couple of quick ones, just for me to kick things off. You know, you sort of mentioned that you'd expect there to be sort of more escalations down the line. We've seen, you know, there's the localized approach. Obviously, this week it's been sort of layered on nationally with areas such as ourselves still having additional restrictions. Do you think the next step will be sort of again focused on those particular hotspots rather than just being sort of blanket restrictions across the whole country? Do you have any sort of sense on that? And the other one I just wanted to ask you before we go to the floor was the sort of the Prime Minister's message around office working, and obviously there'd been a you know, work from home if you can, then a bit of a gentle push to getting back into offices. We know lots of businesses have really worked hard to make sure that their office is COVID secure and safe for workers, and then that was one of the messages, I guess, that came back from the Prime Minister earlier this week of work from home if you can. That's been caveated by, you know, if you really need to get to work, or there's challenges, or you've got mental health sort of challenges, then please do still go into the office. But be interested to get your take on that. So there's a couple from me to start, and then we'll go into the audience's questions.
Sure. So, I mean, I think in terms of where I expect we'll be heading on restrictions is I do think we will probably see more national level restrictions coming. And I think you only have to look at Scotland to get a sense of the direction of travel. And where Wales is going, you know, and it is important to keep in context the size. You know, England is much bigger than Wales, and so you kind of see some of the comparators there. I think what we will also see is some additional tiers added to the local restriction model. So at the moment we have 3 levels. And there are, the level of national intervention has lots of variations. So you've got Birmingham with restrictions on household visiting, but we don't have the additional restrictions on meeting up with people in hospitality that they have in the Northwest and the Northeast. And then you have areas like Bolton and Leicester that have shut down non-essential businesses again and gone into full lockdown. So I think you will see more clarity over the kind of staging of local in a much clearer way, with more restrictions at a higher level start to appear. But I do think that we are likely, unless numbers start to come down rapidly, to see more national restrictions being put in as well over the coming weeks.
Right.
And then remind me, sorry, Paul, the second
on the office, the return
on the office point. Yeah, sure. So I think, you know, it's an interesting balancing act, because I think businesses have been trying really hard to be COVID safe and create COVID safe environments. And one of the challenges we've got is that now we've got widespread transmission in the community, trying to really understand whether, when you've got a cluster of cases linked to a business, is this because something's gone wrong in the business, or is it actually about people's lives at home and where they've been mingling there? And generally what we're seeing, particularly with some of the really great exemplary businesses, is actually that the transmissions happen with people car sharing to work, or it's the cigarette breaks or the lunch breaks where the social distancing's disappeared. So I think it is the advice at the moment, particularly for office workers, is move back to where you were when we were just coming out of lockdown. You will have staff that have really struggled, are really struggling with working remotely. And it's about taking a pragmatic approach to create an environment that's safe for them to come back in, or for those where it's business critical. But if it's not business critical and it's not a health and well-being issue, and they can do their job from home, the clear advice from the Prime Minister now is do your job from home if you can, because we're seeing the risk of this continuing to escalate just means we get slammed back into full lockdown. And I think the economic impacts of that will be severe for all of us.
So it's care, it's caution, and it's really applying common sense as well, and recognizing that not doing so is putting us all at a greater risk and just going to exacerbate the challenges. Now, there's a ton of questions, Justin, as we know. So I'm going to try to sort of pick a few and paraphrase if we can. And I mean, it's interesting that there's a few here around communications. Andy Dawson from Curium Solutions said, there's a lot of mocking of the 10 p.m. shutdown. What difference does closing at 10 versus later make? Does the virus know that it's 10 o'clock? Be good to get your views on that. And Andy Cole as well from NEC Group has sort of said, what's your take on the events industry? We saw, some challenging news from the NEC yesterday. They've got COVID secure venues, but can't run an event, whereas obviously people can still get on an aeroplane for 4 or 6 hours is the example that Andy's used.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key bit is thinking about this in terms of when people are in static positions. It's much easier to manage the risk, and it's much easier to know who's been exposed when they're in a static place. And that is the difference between a kind of airline which everyone sat down and they're all wearing face coverings. If you do have a positive person, then it's the 2 rows in front and the 2 rows behind, and they're equivalent across the aisle that you need to worry about. Trying to do that in an event where you don't know where people are and they're moving around becomes much, much more difficult. So I think that is why there are differences in different types of business settings. I think the 10 o'clock thing, really what we've been seeing, and particularly this came from the Northwest, is that it is the later nighttime economy that's the highest risk. The drunker people are, the less likely they are to keep social distancing, and also that you have a funneling effect that starts to happen as venues do close down, and you get a smaller number of venues that people are kind of filtering into the later you get in the night, and that also adds to the risk factor around this. Many of us remember it used to be calling time around 10 o'clock. Many years ago. It's actually not that long ago. It was certainly in my lifetime when I started going to the pub, there was last orders. And it could have been worse. I mean, I think this is the bit for the industry side to recognise. There are countries that have gone harder and earlier and gone 8, 9 o'clock curfews. 10 o'clock is a starting point. If it doesn't work, I can see the government making that a much earlier point. So it's up to us to prove that we can keep people safe in these environments now and halt the spread.
Yeah, no, very much so. And I suppose, it's understandable where there's the questions, there's another one around almost sometimes how it's communicated, back to that point of communication and people either sort of having genuine confusion or wondering, well, why can I, not go around and sit in my mother's garden safely distance, but I can still go to the pub with 6 people, which is part of the challenge, isn't it here? But it's also why we need everyone to pull together as well.
Yeah, I mean, very much so. And I suppose my rule of thumb is if someone else has done the risk assessment about the meeting or the gathering and they're watching it and keeping an eye out in the same way they would keep you safe from fire, they're keeping you safe from COVID, then it's probably going to be okay. If there's no risk assessment and there's no one keeping an eye on what's going on that you're not related to and you don't live with, then it's probably not okay.
That's a great little way of viewing it. There's a lot of questions around universities. Obviously, there's the news around the outbreak in Glasgow. I guess just a general sense of, students are back in the city. We've got a huge student population here. What's I guess the work that's been done with the universities? How do we manage the risks there, help them and support them as well?
Yeah, so I've been working with the universities since February. I've been meeting some of the universities on a weekly basis and others on a fortnightly basis. All of them have action plans in place. All of them have got student conduct contracts about what the expectation of students are. And they're very clear, if the students don't abide by this, then they won't be students any longer. And they are already starting to take disciplinary action against students that have already started to breach or been shown to breach these kind of guidelines and what is considered appropriate behaviour. And I think they take it very, very seriously. We've got outbreak plans in place for student halls of residence. And we have, all the universities have a form of internal contact tracing as well to help the public health teams work out where a student's been and who might have been at risk. Very similar to kind of the conversations we have with schools. The risk from students or with students is pretty much the same as with any other young adults. It's about socialization. You know, actually, when students are in class, the risk is very, very small. That's not where we're seeing student outbreaks happening. The outbreak that's currently happening in Glasgow is a good example of that. It's all about the student residents, and it's people popping in and out of each other's flats. Now, we've been really clear in Birmingham. Your student flat is your house, and therefore that's what you come and go from. You cannot go into another student's flat. That at the moment is against the law, and you will get fined. And the universities work really hard with us to make sure that message is crystal clear. But we had the rise before the students return. And actually, as I said before, the biggest rise we're seeing is in that 30 to 39-year-old age group. And in the 20 to 29-year-old age group, it's not really that 20 and 21-year-old age group, it's slightly older. So we're yet to see whether the students make a significant impact, but that's about working with the universities and the students themselves. And I have to say the guilds and the unions have been really important in this. And finally, most of the universities are doing hybrid teaching already. Many of them are doing online only in some of the courses where they can do that safely and appropriately. So there's a lot of work in place.
Yeah, and that's what needs to happen, and we need the compliance from everyone to allow us to not go back to that lockdown that we saw in March and April. And you only have to look at the graphs that Raj was showing earlier to see the impact that had on the economy. We're recovering from that. It isn't perfect right now. There's loads of challenges and lots that we're lobbying around. But at the same time, it's better than it had been. A couple of other sort of quick questions, Justin. There's one here about travel restrictions and the likelihood of there being travel restrictions in and out of, say, Birmingham, Black Country areas of national intervention. And also a couple of questions that link to shielding and carers and sort of what the current advice is for those, and also if there's likely to be sort of like more measures introduced over winter time. I don't know if you have any views or insights on that.
So at the moment, there are no plans to see any restrictions on travel locally. I think if we saw continual escalation, that probably would appear, but there are exemptions for work and for education or for healthcare reasons. And there are no plans to introduce any shielding restrictions at the moment. Again, that may be something we see as we move back towards the winter, but I think it's unlikely to be the same pattern of shielding that we saw in the first wave. It's likely to be slightly less restrictive. The important message I would say for employers at the moment is if you've got staff who've previously been shielded, please help them get flu jabs. So please ensure that they can go to an appointment during work time, that it's paid time to go to. All of those things that become a barrier to people getting their flu jab, this year we really need them to get it because there is already clear evidence from Australia that if you catch COVID and flu at the same time, you are much, much more likely to die. So we really need to avoid that if we can.
That's an absolutely critical message, and one will certainly amplify. So Justin, I know you've got to head off shortly. Just any sort of final message for the business community, and I say I know we're working closely, and the comms is a constant certainly in this changing world. But any particular point to sort of underline and just leave people with today?
I suppose my closing points would be about saying it is very serious at the moment. It's likely to get worse before it gets better, and I think we've all got to steel ourselves for that. What I would say is be compassionate with yourselves and your staff. Be conscious of what people have been through and some of the emotions they'll be going through at the moment, looking at going back into it again. And then the final thing is we've just launched Birmingham Community COVID Champions. Please encourage all your staff to sign up and become become champions. It's the way that we're trying to make sure that everyone in the city has accurate information directly from my public health team and from me to keep themselves safe, to keep their families safe, and to keep their communities safe. We have to respond to this as a city and as a city region, because it's the actions that we all take in our daily lives that are going to make a difference in how this plays out over the coming weeks and months.
Yeah, that's where it starts, really, isn't it? It's everyone has their own particular responsibility, and if we take that seriously, try to follow the guidance, be smart, and I think your sort of little rule of thumb there about knowing, has that situation been risk assessed? Is someone looking and watching and keeping us safe? And if not, then you know the threat of COVID is very, very real. Is a good way of sort of managing through this. Justin, thank you so much for joining us again, and for sort of the openness, handling the questions and the update there. Hopefully we've tried to run through as many of the questions that people have posted as possible, and what we'll certainly do after this is pick up on others. Any that we haven't got to, we'll endeavour to feed those over to Justin and his team, and to get back to people as well. And obviously there's a constant flow of information and messaging coming out, both from the council, the public health team, and say the chamber, looking to push and promote those as well. Okay, great. Well, moving on now to our second panelist. I introduced him earlier, but delighted to be joined by Simon Struthers, who's the director at 3P Innovation, and is going to, if you can sort of see from the screen here, talk about how we can, as businesses, innovate our way out of uncertainty. So Simon, I'm going to hand over to you, and then what we'll do, we'll once you finish the presentation, we'll finish proceedings today with some further questions on this and any that people have for Raj and the data that we saw earlier. So Simon, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Just before I start, can everybody hear me? Yep, coming through, that's great. So yeah, thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the Chambers for inviting 3P to join in this morning to talk about innovation and certainly what it means for 3P and how we used it in the COVID-19 crisis in particular. Let's see if trying to get the PowerPoint to work. There we go. So there's three brief topics I'd like to cover. Firstly, a quick intro to 3P and our history. Then I'll touch on how we adapted to COVID-19 and a particular case study on what we did to diversify the business as our order book was put on hold. And then finally, I'd like to just beg a question really, what does innovation look like? And put a model forward for you to consider, maybe for your business, that might help. Okay, so first of all, who are 3P? So as a business founded in 2006, we're based in Warwick, and we specialise in custom engineering and manufacturing of production machinery. So we're designing and building a very wide range of machines from lab scale to commercial. We're supplying into pharmaceutical and medical device sectors. About 70% of our sales go into that. And we're also involved in personal care, food and other FMCG markets, which we do proactively just to ensure we've got a cross-fertilisation of ideas and also not an over-reliance on just one sector. And we've got about 80 people at the moment and increasing. We've just had a record turnover of 10.7 million this year. And I guess 50% year-on-year growth since we started. So this graph shows in a nutshell what I suppose how we've got there in a sense. It shows that space means capacity to grow, at least for a business like ours. And you can see from maybe 2014 to 2018 how our sales flatlined between 2014 and 18. Basically, we were full at our previous facility. We've touched on some of these topics already, but having cash and being really prudent with cash enabled us to invest in a business, in a new building back in 2018. And that having cash, you've got the confidence to invest, and that has given us superb headroom to grow. And the last 2 years, we've had 100% growth, which has been pretty amazing for us. We're planning to keep growing as well, so innovation will play a key role in facilitating this. We'll continue to innovate technically, so with about 15% of profits applied back into R&D every year and into NPD. And this is, in particular for us, it's enabling us to establish our own range of standard machines, really, to help reduce the level of risk in the business that's perhaps associated with more of the custom projects we take on. We struggle to recruit engineers, so growing our engineers, growing our own engineers is a key strategy for us. And we've just recruited 10 people last month, 6 undergrad placement students and 4 graduates. I just wanted to share with you a technical, I guess, technological innovation that has been a huge factor in our growth. So multiple projects, large and small, have been sold using this technology, filter weight. It's a powder filling, it's a microdosing piece of technology that helps companies to fill challenging powders which may have very poor flow properties. From an initial prototype in 2008, we've now got it through 5 generations of improvement. We've protected the IP, absolutely critically important for us. And it's been, as I say, a major factor behind our growth. So small things can make a big difference in a business. Just being seen to be innovating helps convince customers, even though they may not actually need that innovation itself. So, just to be seen to be bringing some new ideas to the marketplace, to be investing in new technologies and changing the way you work is all useful. And we were able to, we won a Queen's Award for Enterprise for this product in 2020, this just a couple of months back. So how did 3P adapt to the COVID crisis? Well, as a business, we're already used to working for multiple markets and customer needs. So our culture is used to kind of pivoting and adapting to new challenges. Also, we're an SME, so getting towards the M of the SME now, but nevertheless, we're still agile and small enough to react quickly. We're completely project-based, so effectively we're organised to innovate. And our teams form and reform regularly to suit different markets and needs. Nevertheless, come COVID back in March, we obviously had major concerns. So this list on the left, I'm sure every business in Greater Birmingham had a similar list to this. But our strategies for dealing with the crisis included engaging a strategic marketing consultant. So suddenly our normal route to market, trade shows, conferences and seminars suddenly all stopped. So we knew we had to change our approach. So lots of common sense actions, perhaps. We've always been a few steps ahead of government with COVID safety policy. As Justin was just saying, we did take that very seriously and we continue to do so. Adding creating a 6-day working rather than 5 with a split shift was introduced. And then the last point in this really pivoting part of the business to produce at the time free of charge PPE visors was probably one of the main innovations we took to diversify and also to try to help reduce the risk on a declining order book at the time for our normal type of business. So as an OEM to the med tech sector, we're in a good position to pivot the business to help with the PPE crisis. And full face coverage was obviously a hot topic with the need to protect eyes, mouth and nose. So making visors was a good place to start. So within 7 days of being requested by a clinic in Southam, we'd set up and supplied our initial 30 visors within 7 days. On from the 3D printing community, so hundreds of hobbyists and companies with 3D printers joined in. And basically, we use the company Solid Print 3D. We're a key hub for collecting and forwarding parts to us. We realised very quickly, though, that 3D printing was nowhere near fast enough for the volumes required. So we appealed to multinational customer base. I mean, we supply to multinationals, so we're having a existing route into that was a major factor and a huge help. And we needed help and funding for injection molding tooling. So Mondelez stepped up to the plate in Bourneville and agreed to fund the first tool, which was fantastic. And then ongoing from that, we secured major support and donations from companies like GSK, BAT and Chiesi. Another key factor to consider, we haven't got all the answers at 3P, but we ship out maybe 8 to 10 machines a year. So distribution was a huge factor, and we had to consider how to do that. So we partnered with existing blood bikers from Shropshire, Staffordshire and Cheshire initially, and then Midland blood bikers came on board, and Warwickshire and Solihull blood bikers came on board. So our distribution channel suddenly became much stronger than we could ever have ever done before ourselves. And then Orbital Direct came on board and distributed to the rest of the UK free of charge. So in the end, we delivered over 30,000 visors to over 300 institutions. On from this, we were granted a CE mark for the product, for our visor product in July, which was great news. We also won a UK government grant to continue with industrialisation and development of the supply chain. So we're not producing now, but we're ready to supply again if we needed, and I sincerely hope that we're not. So just to finish off, I'd like to help maybe explore and perhaps clarify what innovation is and how a business can use it to good effect. So to start with, I found a few definitions I thought might be useful from a selection of expert innovators. So let's just quickly whiz through these. Innovation is the application of ideas that are novel and useful. Innovation is about staying relevant, adapt and evolve to meet ever-changing needs. This guy, Kevin McFarlane, the introduction of products and services that add value to the organisation. Robert Brand thinks it's something that's got to be new and addresses customer needs and wants. And Paul Sloan thinks innovation is the implementation of something new. Jeffrey Baumgartner, the implementation of ideas in order to generate value. And Drew Boyd thinks it's anything that's new, useful and surprising. So interesting that the surprising word comes in here. So I found a really good website that a guy called Nick Skillahorn manages, called Idea to Value. It's worth a look at that after the events, perhaps. But he created the ultimate definition or he pulled those different viewpoints together from above and came up with an ultimate definition: executing an idea which addresses a specific challenge and achieves value for both the company and the customer. So moving on from that, definitions are fine, but really what should we innovate? Probably more important than the definition is what should we innovate? And this particular quote resonated with me, and I think it helps to explain how innovation works successfully at 3P. Innovation is bigger than a product or a technological platform. It's the innovations to organizations and management that kind of precede an individual product or technology. And a guy called David Burkus is one of the world's leading business thinkers on business and leadership. He basically suggested great leaders don't innovate the product, they innovate the factory. So if we consider the organization and management style as the factory, then there are a number of key themes to consider that might create the right conditions for innovation to happen. First of all, are you an organization that's just focused on profit, or have you got a bigger purpose in life? So do you share a value with your and a mission with your customer, with your staff to make a difference, help make life better, for example? Have you got a genuine desire to help your customers? Moving from hierarchies to networks, are you agile, multifunctional teams? Certainly forming and reforming to meet specific customer needs is what we do, and kind of by definition has enabled us to innovate. From controlling to empowering. So this is the message here, is really to let your employees work it out, give them some rope, obviously to do it safely. Giving trust and having high expectations of your people really makes a huge difference with regard to innovation. From planning to experimentation. So this is about getting out there and trying something. So it's a major thing, a major part of our work, really. A big part of what we do is proof of principle testing, getting out there, a bit like Q's lab on James Bond. We'll get out there and build something and observe and experience rather than theorizing and analyzing for too long. So the message really is to fail fast, try something, fail fast, learn, pivot, and then move on again. And finally, from privacy to transparency. So this is about management sharing and involving the workforce, making you, and if you do that, you'll get, people will feel valued, and feeling valued obviously leads to motivation and ownership of problems and finding solutions. So yeah, I hope that's provided some food for thought. Yeah, thank you for listening.
That's great. No, thank you, Simon. That was really fascinating and interesting, and some great sort of pieces that you've drawn out there. I suppose one thing I was wanted to ask, just to sort of start off, is that, see, 3P, you've got innovation in your name. I mean, what do you think are some of the main barriers that stop businesses from innovating? Do you sort of have any sort of view on that? And I guess, people would always like to reflect and think that they would try, but what are the things that just hold people back, and ultimately, I guess, are going to cause them challenges within their business, or not allow them to seize the opportunities, such as, say, you demonstrated there with the PPE?
Yeah, I think, certainly having some cash is a major factor. If you don't have cash in a business, then, as I say, the confidence to do anything different to what you know and what you're comfortable with is very difficult. So I think that's certainly a key factor, and also planning and being proactive in saying, right, this chunk of cash here we are going to use to innovate, and that could mean investing in technology like the filter weight system that I mentioned, or it could be that, right, we need to innovate in the way we engage with customers and implement a CRM system, or engage with digital marketing strategy. So it's I think certainly having some cash in the business is a key thing. Secondly, coming back to that last slide, really, are you a bunch of control freaks in the business? I know in our business we are, but I think it's if you can recognise that and know that, I guess, recognise a time when you need to give people a little bit of rope and to go and try something new, and encouraging people to come forward with their ideas, and holding them, I guess, accountable to define some strategy for their core processes in the business as well.
So being brave, I suppose, yeah, so that you're able to. I
think so, yeah, and sharing the load, sharing the responsibility amongst multiple people, instead of trying to control it from one guy in an ivory tower or girl. Yeah. We've got
a ton of questions, so I'll try to get through these quickly and pop a few to you. I mean, David Thompson's put a good one here. So the 15% new product development cost to sales is really impressively high. It certainly is. I mean, how long has it been at that level? How long did it take for that to start really boosting your growth?
So I think we at that level, I mean, when you look at 15% to these days, that's a 200,000 or 300,000 for us at this point. So it certainly wasn't at that level when we started, but we started small, and we were able to innovate with customers supporting us. So you don't have to necessarily rely on a big pot of cash to do things. If you can sell an idea to a customer and get them to fund what could be maybe the first product or the first incarnation of a new technology, then that is probably the ideal way. So I think the key message is don't do it in a silo and blind to what the market needs. Is talk to your customers and understand where their challenges and the gaps are, and then consider, right, can I help innovate? Through innovation, can I help close this gap? And does it give me something of value to take forward? For example, protecting the IP and then selling multiples. So if you can get a customer on board to fund that first one, which is very often the case in what we do, then that's the ideal scenario.
And this maybe sort of builds on that from Pam Waddell, is collaborating with your supply chain and other businesses a key part of innovation for you, and sort of including cross-sector working? And do you sort of proactively go out and look at opportunities to work cross-sector?
I think, yeah. I mean, our customer base is definitely cross-sector. We probably, in terms of where we market, we do focus on pharmaceutical and medical devices, because otherwise you can spread, there's only so much you can do in business development. There's only so many conferences and things you can go to. So we choose to grow or to focus our growth efforts in pharma and medical, because there's plenty of, I guess, scope and diversity in that but we're also very active in confectionery. In Mondelez is a key customer for us, for example, and also into personal care and other FMCG sectors. Yeah.
Yeah. And Susie Branch from BMET has popped a question in here. How do you think we can create healthy spaces for innovation and create creativity? And I suppose certainly, when you also think about having to work remotely right now, any views on that? Both, I suppose, in normal circumstances, if we can think of those, and also in the current circumstances.
Healthy spaces is an interesting one. So I'll come back to project groups really. Because we've got, in our business, for example, we've got 5 project groups which are headed up by a senior project manager, and these are like mini businesses in their own right. So having that in place allows them to really service a particular market or customer, on an individual basis. So we can we can quite quickly kind of pivot again and adapt to a specific market requirement, whether it's kind of regulatory challenges or the actual challenge what the customer is looking to achieve, getting a new product to market, for example. So I think creating that team and project-based organisation, it would be an idea to achieve, as I say, the spaces for innovation. And
creating structure to facilitate
comes back to organisation structure in that instance. Yeah.
And Mike Day's also he said actually, obviously the 3P story is incredibly positive. Do you think that the experience and the way you go about it has strengthened your staff loyalty and engagement? Do you sort of have really good retention and or is it sort of was it hard to put sort of peg and say, yeah, absolutely, that this has been the reason why we've got such a particularly strong culture?
No, I think staff retention is a key thing, and loyalty is a big part, and we've certainly got that. That's not to say people don't move on. I mean, we're investing in the graduate development scheme and also student interns, placement students. Obviously, the younger guys and girls, they are more likely to move on after 2 or 3 years, but also quite a few come back, which is fantastic as well. So,
absolutely. And Raj, I'm just going to, one final question for you. I couldn't let you get away without having to sort of come in, but there was an earlier question actually from Mark, which sort of touches on the QBR report and saying that investment in CapEx really sort of says that is the main indicator of innovation. And Mark's point is that innovation can be created using human capital, which I think certainly come out in Simon's presentation there. But just, I suppose, from the chamber perspective, to maybe reflect on that and to reassure that we absolutely recognise the human input into innovation. But any sort of just views on that?
Yeah, so it's a good point, and I take the point about obviously focusing predominantly on CapEx in this particular presentation. I mean, the reason we did that was because we've had that question in the survey for almost 30 years, and it's a nice segue into obviously what Simon's going to speak about today as well. We also have a question which relates to the investment that people make in training their staff as well. So there are other angles which we appreciate, which incorporate innovation and investment in innovation. And the good thing is that we've got a series of questions in the survey which we can take the data and do more of a deep dive into that human capital element. So if you've got any particular ideas, Mark, that you'd like to share, then get in touch with me, because we could always include additional questions if you want to look into further detail around what defines innovation and what particular elements will be of most interest to the business community. Yeah, so please do get in touch if you've got any further questions.
Yeah, great. No, thanks, Raj. And I know Joe from BCU has also put a great comment in the chat room just around some of the tools that the BCU use around promoting innovation, Miro boards, and really help to break thinking and allow imagination to flow, and just picks up on Simon's point around allowing teams to self-diagnose. And no, I think we'd all agree that absolutely the power of human capital just simply cannot be underestimated. Well, I'm mindful of the time, so I'm going to bring proceedings to a close now. I hope that everyone who's tuned in has found that useful, informative, And yeah, you know, sort of some thoughts to take away, both around the current situation that we're in, a bit more information on what businesses are saying about the current economic conditions, and then they're just sort of finally there, and with Simon's presentation, just to get the old brain thinking around innovation and what you can be doing in your business right now to make sure that you're nimble and agile and really geared up to seize the opportunities that are out there right now and certainly will be coming away, however challenging things may seem. I'd like to thank all of the panelists, obviously Dr. Justin Varney, who was with us earlier, Simon Struthers, Raj, for your great sort of run through the survey results there. I would like to thank the team behind the event today, particularly Jess Uppel, our colleague at the Chamber. And last but by no means least, Joe Birch and everyone at BCU for their ongoing support of the QBR and the Chamber. It's absolutely invaluable. Thank you to everyone for tuning in and engaging. And as I say, please keep your eyes on our comms channels later today, and we'll have the latest on the Chancellor's winter support measures that he's going to be announcing. So thank you very much and have a great day, everybody.